Alright guys, sorry I couldn't be here today. Basically today we are going to introduce a new lesson, a new unit, public opinion. And I know you guys are all very excited to listen to my voice when I'm not here. And I decided I didn't really need to come in any longer because you guys are so good at emailing me about missing work or whatever. Right, Lauren? So, on that note, public opinion. So, public opinion is basically, it is what it sounds like. It is the opinion of the general American public. And it is analyzed by polls. So, basically, there are people that go around and they call people on the phone and they talk to people in person, however the poll is done. And they basically exist simply to measure, basically, the views of the American people. As this is President Truman holding up the newspaper headline that shows that he lost the election, even though he had won. So they are not always accurate. This is, in fact, there's almost always a margin of error. In fact, there is a margin of error with every single poll. But some polls are much more accurate than other polls. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but not just yet. Alright, but first we're going to talk about political socialization. And I'll have you guys look at this graphic after we've talked a bit more. But essentially, the most important part of political socialization is the family. It is the biggest factor. What your parents think, what your grandparents think, this ends up having the largest influence on people. You spend more time with your family than you do with people at school, in spite of the fact that you might be, on Facebook, Twitter, what have you, talking to friends. Essentially, it is the family that has some of the biggest influence on an individual's political beliefs. The mass media, of course, we're talking about newspapers, we're talking about news programs. All of these have substantial influence on people's views. Some news is more biased towards the liberal side or the conservative side, depending on which news we're talking about. Schools are a big factor. Your teachers have influence over you, your concept over what is fair, what is not fair. Is there such a thing as fair? Education levels is another big one. Essentially, people with more education your education level does have some influence as to which way you vote, and people with more education happen to be more likely to vote than those with less education. Historical events in one's life can push people to becoming, one party or another. For example, FDR's New Deal, this idea of creating, Social Security, creating all those job programs that we've talked about in the past. These are events that pushed people to become Democrats because it was the Democratic Party that provided people with jobs. And as a result, this was kind of a life-changing event. John F. Kennedy was definitely, I wouldn't say his death per se made people Democrats, but I would say John F. Kennedy's presidency you can actually tell how people talk about JFK, and you can tell a lot about whether they're Democratic or Republicans. Civil rights, definitely for both parties in different time periods, you could say it pushed people to one party or another. It was the radical Republicans in the late 1800s that were pro-civil rights, and it was Southern Republicans and Northern Democrats who pushed for civil rights in the more modern era, 1960s. The civil rights movement also had a big effect on pushing people to one party or another. There was a civil rights movement that really pushed African Americans to become Democrats. There was a split among African Americans between JFK and Nixon, and it was JFK, or I think it was his brother, who basically placed a call to Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife while he was in jail that pushed some people to start supporting the Kennedys. And they get a lot of credit for their civil rights views. Though it was it was under LBJ where the big laws were passed. Oh my goodness. Nixon's resignation was a big deal that pushed people to becoming Democrats. The distrust of Republicans, the distrust of government. I mean, Nixon definitely, at the bare minimum, bent some rules. Really, he broke some rules. Reagan Democrats, these were Democrats who were tired of Jimmy Carter and decided that essentially he was not someone that they could trust for president. And as a result, Reagan overwhelmingly won the country in his elections. And this is a large part changed the way people vote. A lot of people who've been working class whites in the middle of the country have been voting Democratic, and many of them switched to the Republican Party. All right. I mean, people's friends, of course, influence their political socialization, and how basically the president could influence you if you were inspired or hated the president. That this would definitely change your view of an entire party and might push you to one philosophy or the other. The neighborhood one grows up in can influence you. Definitely religion has a large effect on whether or not people influences their political views. Definitely, we have a large part of the country believes in God and are religious, and it is Protestants who basically tend to vote Republican. They tend to be moderately conservative to conservative. That does not mean that every single Protestant is voting Republican. That is definitely not the case, nor does it mean that every single Catholic is voting Democratic. Catholics do tend to support Democratic candidates, though single-issue voters who are focused on abortion will not support, or less likely to support Democrats. Born agains and evangelicals tend to be more conservative. Jews tend to support Democrats, though again that depends on how. Jews who are very supportive of the state of Israel will tend to support Republicans. So these are generalities. These are not hard and fast rules. Women have become more reliable Democratic voters. They've increased in number. A higher percentage of women have voted, and then they have become a larger and larger percentage of the Democratic voting bloc. So this has been a shift where women you did not used to support Democrats, it is now much more likely. Meanwhile, race definitely plays an impact. There's a big fight over the Latino vote and whether the Democrats are going to win the Latino vote for a generation. There are Republicans who are very concerned about that and want the party to be less anti-illegal immigration as a result. What's not on here, Muslims tend to vote Democratic, or tend to vote for the Democrats. That is generally based on discrimination and protection from the government. Age definitely affects how people vote. It is also important to remember that the elderly are the most likely to vote, where the young are the least likely. And as you guys have talked about, it was the young who ended up voting for President Obama, where it was the older who tended to vote for Republicans. And region of the country is definitely the coasts, particularly the Northeast and the West Coast, tend to be more liberal. The middle of the country tends to be more conservative, particularly the South tends to be more conservative. The northern part of the country tends to be a little more liberal. The way one grows up and income. I mean, basically, when you're talking about cutting, when the Republicans are talking about cutting taxes, I mean, that pushes, if you're making a lot of money, that's going to push people to the Republican Party if you're making more money. If you are paying less money and you want more money in government services, the idea of cutting taxes on the wealthy, well, that means reduced services for people who are receiving them. And of course, the way one grew up, like just, I mean, this is so that all of these things have a huge impact on political socialization. We'll skip this because we're kind of doing this in class. Well, in fact, we're going to kind of pause right here because this is we're done with political socialization.